Welcome to the Pitch It To Me podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of Flesh and Blood design, hosted by three sweaty casuals who like to pretend that they're experts. Today's episode will be about how to be a part of the Flesh and Blood community. On Red Pitch, Fuzzy will talk about what Flesh and Blood does best. On Yellow Pitch, Clark will talk about the typical ways that people engage with the game, and on Blue Pitch, Joel will give a rundown on the competitive play program. You can find us across all socials such as TikTok and Instagram at Pitch It To Me Podcast.
For our first episode, we want to give a sort of pathway to Flesh and Blood and talk about the programs that LSS has created to play the game, from local armories to world championships. We'll talk about different formats, our experiences with the game. By the end of this episode, whether you've never played a game before or you're in deep, hopefully you feel inspired to play more. Thanks for taking the leap of faith and clicking on our first episode. We've technically recorded a few already, and we wanted to let you know this will be our first episode.
Yeah, hopefully we're experts, and that really comes across in this recording.
Yeah, we know what we're talking about. We've been in all the backroom conversations.
Mm-hmm. We're in the know, and we'll be your guide.
Yeah, we got to make those shareholders happy.
All right, so I'll kick us off with our red pitch for today. I want to talk about why and how to play Flesh and Blood. We like the game a lot. All of us here, we have some experience playing trading card games, and this is the one we're currently obsessed with. Mm-hmm. I personally have come from, my previous favorite was Magic the Gathering, but I also play a lot of digital trading card games to pass the time. I really like trading card games. Flesh and Blood is my favorite right now. I believe it will be for a long time. It does a lot of things really well, and I want to tell you, the listener, exactly what that is, just in case you're not convinced as far as how great this game is. One thing that I really like about Flesh and Blood is it is, I'd say, a low variance game. Compared to Magic the Gathering especially, if you've played Magic the Gathering, you've been mana screwed in Magic the Gathering, and
Yeah.
You know how awful of a feeling that can be. Literally, they have non-games. That's why they play a best of 3 format typically, because you have to have room for one out of those every once in a while games that you literally had no way of winning because you drew all of your lands. And the mulligan system helps with that, but it is just a tool to fight against the natural randomness and variance that those games have. It's something fundamental to Magic the Gathering and a lot of trading card games too. I'm not saying that all of them are like that, but I do really appreciate that coming from Magic the Gathering into Flesh and Blood. Because there's no mana system, there's no lands to play, a lot of cards are able to do very similar things, and you end up with a very low variance game.
Yeah, it's something that so many games try to fix by having like a natural mana progression. Mm-hmm. Just gaining 1 extra mana every single turn. And Flesh and Blood found such a unique workaround with that, with drawing at the end of your turn to a brand new hand.
Yeah, and that also feels really refreshing. Like Flesh and Blood, because it's a hand-to-hand game, as opposed to like building a board state and drawing 1 card per turn, you move through a lot of cards really quickly, and I think it's very exciting. And you end up having a different pacing in the game compared to a lot of others that I found really refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might find that your mid to late game are just as interesting or more interesting than you would find in a Magic game where somebody's getting clearly blown out because they have such a huge advantage. Whereas Flesh and Blood is so much more about the decisions you make throughout the game and how it impacts your late game, and see if you can close it out.
And if that sounds difficult, honestly, it is. Flesh and Blood you make a lot of decisions. Flesh and Blood cards are designed to have multi-purpose. That's part of how they have the complexity similar to Magic the Gathering without a lot of the variance. Cards can be played, cards can be pitched, cards can block. That's a lot of things that you can do with 1 card. They're very different, and every card has that capability. So when you look at your hand at the start of your turn, you're thinking, which ones am I pitching? Which ones am I okay with blocking? Which ones am I using? And that can lead to a lot of different decision trees where there's lots of different decisions you can make. Some of them look obviously better than others. Some of them it's not that obvious. And for that reason, I would say Flesh and Blood is a skill-based game compared to a lot of TCGs. Trading card games in general have a lot of luck to them. Which cards do you draw sooner? Which cards do you draw together? And you can't really get away from that in a trading card game, nor would I want to. right? That's part of the fun of trading card games. Every time I sit down, it's a little different because there's a little bit of randomness involved. I don't want a game that goes completely away from that, but Flesh and Blood is definitely stepped a lot closer to like the skill and things are within my control compared to luck and the game is decided by random coin tosses. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that I really enjoy about Flesh and Blood too, because I'm such a perfectionist, and there's always another layer to uncover with Flesh and Blood.
Yeah.
And there are some tactics that rely solely on RNG or the randomness of a game, and there's others that are just completely like, if you do not play this deck well and manage your resources well, you will lose just because there's so much nuance to it.
And I find it very rewarding for that reason. I love having a game where I feel like my decisions really matter and the game is decided by my decisions. I feel that more in this game than I have with any other trading card game.
Yeah, with so many trading card games, what I really enjoy is the ability to find the most optimal turn. And in Flesh and Blood, I am constantly recalculating that every single turn. I think it's one of the things that really pulled me into the game and has kept me so interested is that every single hand is, oh, this is a brand new hand, brand new thing to optimize. In a lot of other games, okay, I draw a card a turn, and usually I know what I need to do with that card. In Flesh and Blood, it's 4 brand new cards, and it's going to be a lot more up in the air what I need to do with each one.
And because of that complexity and impact, agency that each player has, Flesh and Blood can get away with having best of 1 matches. Most card games in a competitive tournament, you'd expect best of 3. Even at high competitive levels in Flesh and Blood, they have best of 1 matches. And I think that speaks to the way that Flesh and Blood has a high relationship with skill, more so than many other TCGs.
It certainly makes tournament days feel a lot better going to local tournaments. You can really sort of move on from a match after you have it.
Yeah, and there's this sort of, how do I say this delicately? I feel like a game like Flesh and Blood, because there are so many decision points, making a best of 3, like matches were going to last like, I don't know, 2 hours if you do that. And it might even last less because if you, for some reason, get tilted on the first match and then it pours into your other matches, it can be hard because of the many decision points every single turn multiplied by 3 games. It can be a lot. So I definitely like the best of 1, and there's a lot of hedging you do to make that best of 1 your best shot at winning the game because of the way that you sideboard and prepare for your opponent's game plan compared to other TCGs.
And they're still able to have a nice sideboard mechanic in the game. I don't feel like I'm tricked because out of a best of 1 match, I'm not able to prepare for my opponent. They were able to work that in well. You're not losing that in this game. And speaking of high-level competitive play, I really appreciate Flesh and Blood's and Legend Story Studios' competitive play program. We're going to hear a lot more about the specifics about that later on in the episode. I played Magic for the longest time, and I knew about competitive Magic, but I never felt like that was something that I could approach and engage with, either because I didn't understand the system or I wasn't able to go to any events near me and or I didn't have the resources to get involved, but partially because I'm a little bit older now in getting into Flesh and Blood, but also because Flesh and Blood is really good at giving players the opportunity to get involved with competitive play. I've been able to take the plunge and I found it really rewarding. I think Flesh and Blood's competitive program is very nice. And because the community is relatively small right now, that's another thing that makes it so approachable. You only have to be better than maybe 1,000 people rather than 10,000 people to do really well, to be considered a top player in Flesh and Blood. The list is shorter.
Yeah. And Legend Story Studios have done so much to really promote their in-person play, especially competitive play. And in fact, what is it? That's the story I was told coming into the game, that the name Flesh and Blood originally came from they wanted people playing this game in the flesh and blood, in person.
That's the focus of the game. And they were somehow able to keep that focus, even though this game was released about 5 years ago, right before the pandemic hit. And it was somehow able to find a loyal enough fan base, a strong enough community that they were still playing through the pandemic, through like webcam play or what have you. They were able to keep the game going and are still going strong today. And I think that speaks to how good the game is. The game would have to be good in order to earn themselves that loyal of a fan base to be able to survive the pandemic. It speaks to the quality of the game.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of doubters of this game initially, and coming out of the pandemic, there was the huge calling in Vegas. I think that was like the first big event outside of the pandemic, and it blew everyone's minds. Like how many people attended, I can't remember the exact numbers. I think it might be like 10,000 or something. But it was pretty gnarly, and like you said, the chokehold this game has over people is insane, and like I said, all the layers like really keep people around, and I feel like the reason why I enjoy it as well is how accessible the competitive play is. Like typically with other card games like Magic the Gathering, can be kind of intimidating, especially if you don't have like a wealth of knowledge for the previous sets that come out and what just came out and like all these rotating sets, things like that.
If you've played other trading card games before, especially Magic the Gathering, I don't think Flesh and Blood is too out there. It uses a similar rule set to the point where you'll understand a lot of the language in Flesh and Blood if you have experience with other trading card games before. I would say it's even more streamlined than Magic the Gathering, where with Magic you have lots of different phases. You'll see this in like Yu-Gi-Oh as well. You have like upkeep or standby phase, draw phase, main phase, battle phase, other main phase, end step. And Flesh and Blood's able to streamline all of that. There's really just two phases. You have your turn and the end step where you don't get to play cards. You don't get priority there, so you really are only playing cards during the turn. There's also the combat step, a reaction step, and there are some intricacies. There's a lot of rules for you to learn. If you like rules, there's definitely enough there for you. But it's not on the same level of Magic the Gathering where you really need to know the right timings in order to make things work. It's pretty easy to get the gist of it. What about you two? Is there anything that you particularly love about Flesh and Blood?
Yeah, I myself have never been a limited player. I've always found myself too greedy to not take the shiniest cardboard and pass the rest and probably subsequently lose the rest of my games.
I mean, same, but it's fun.
It is fun and usually pays for the draft itself, which is cool. But I am usually a constructed player in my limited time in trading card games. I really like the system as well. Like, even though there's a relatively smaller card pool than let's say EDH, I still feel like there's so much to learn and kind of add your own flavor to it. And I've even found that for the first time, I was interested in limited through Flesh and Blood because, and one of my good friends in this game always jokes, whenever the meta's bad, you can still draft. So before I started getting more serious about the game, when my favorite heroes were borderline unplayable, I would just find some local stores that would do draft, or we do like an on-demand draft, and that would kind of satiate my need for the game and kind of open myself up to more opportunities that way.
Yeah. For me, going in a slightly different direction, Flesh and Blood, I love how the smallest sort of rules changes have kept it feeling so fresh when compared to other card games. It feels like a lot of card games that I've played all sort of try and do the same kinds of things with mana and curves and all this. And Flesh and Blood, just by changing one or two rules, by changing one or two ideas, drawing at the end of your turn rather than at the start of your turn. This idea of like using your entire hand. Every card matters. Every card has multiple different uses. All of those things sort of created this far more robust and interesting play pattern that I think is really superior to other card games and is worth diving into.
Awesome. Well said, Clark. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about was, you already know Flesh and Blood is great. You're trying to get your friends to see it too. I would recommend building them a deck or buying one of the starter decks. If you go to Fab TCG, you can sit them down and say, look at all these heroes, pick one. And they're going to go, but I don't know what any of them do. And you say, pick the one that speaks to you on a more primal level.
Yeah.
Which one of these heroes looks interesting? Because they're all fine, especially like at a beginner's level. There may be a couple that are a little bit too complicated, but you as an enfranchised player, you already know that. You just need to steer them away from Cavdane, the merchants, or...
No, not even that. Please just save your friends some trouble. If they start looking at Levia, shake them violently and tell them, no, don't do it. She's a cruel mistress.
I'd probably put Bolton on that list too. Bolton has some really funky mechanics. That's not the way you want to introduce people to the game.
Right.
I nearly bounced off the game because my intro deck was the Bolton starter deck. And and I just did not like it at all. But I would also say having equal levels of the decks that you're building in your collection to share with them. You probably have a bunch of chaff from when you opened up a box or two. You're an enfranchised player. You've dropped some money on this game, not just for specific cards, but also just to build a collection. Build decks out of those collections. Build some lower power stuff, some non-optimized stuff that you can hand to them and play at their level. I think Flesh and Blood can sometimes have this issue of we don't quite have the player base to really support lots of different levels of play. There's kind of like people starting off, and then there are the people who are playing the more higher tier competitive. There isn't really a great bridge in that middle section. So as you build decks and as you give decks to these new players, try to make sure that you also have some decks in that power level. Make sure that they're playing at an equivalent level in terms of decks so that they don't just get slammed.
Unless you don't like them and you just like smashing their face.
Yeah, maybe
with
you
your
don't
tier
want to
one.
play card games with this person.
Another thing I want you to consider, a lot of people tend to think of Blitz as the intro format. I personally think that is fine with an asterisk. LSS only really prints Blitz starter decks. They don't print CC starter decks. So for the ease of entry, if you just want to pick up a deck and play it, it's probably going to have to be a Blitz deck. But keep in mind, Blitz is a little bit more high variance. You can lose a game because your opponent had two really good hands. And in Classic Constructed, that's not really the case. In Classic Constructed, even if you are behind on your life total, even by a significant amount, there's still room to potentially eke out a victory even if you're really behind. And that's part of because it's a more skill-based format. With CC, there's a lot of room to showcase your ability as a player. That can also, understandably, be a little bit more intimidating for a new player. With Blitz, you can sometimes get lucky games because it's a little bit more of a high-variance, high-risk format. If you, as a newer player, get two really good hands, you might be able to steal a victory from somebody who has more experience. It's CC, that's less likely. So that's a little bit of a trade-off. I think most people agree that Classic Constructed is a more well-designed format. It's often called the quote-unquote real game, where cards that are printed are generally designed for Classic Constructed rather than designed to be played in Blitz. CC is kind of the default in a lot of ways. There's something to be said for get your friends to play the default first, which would be Classic Constructed. That's just understandably a little bit more difficult to get into, but something that you should consider if you're showing people how to play. If you are somebody who's interested in Flesh and Blood, but you don't really have any friends that are in the game, or you don't have anyone to play with, I'd like to just let you know that you can always go to the main website, and there's a awesome feature where you can find local events. I use this feature all the time when it's like ProQuest season or Road to National season to know, okay, which of the stores are doing which events. It's a great resource. You can also find great ideas for deck lists that are approachable and budget friendly on YouTube. There's lots of content out there that you can look at. I'd also recommend joining the official Discord if you haven't already and you're looking for more information about the game. The official Discord is great because there's a lot of different topics there. For instance, there's a Discord channel for every hero in the game. And that Discord channel is going to be full of people who like that hero. And they're usually people who are not sweaty. They're approachable and just like to chat, and they're pretty good at answering questions. The Flesh and Blood community, at least in the official Discord that I've seen, are very open to newer players who are like, okay, but how does this card work? And you can put up your deck list, and people would be like, I would take that card out or run this one instead. Great resource. Or you can just post memes. One other thing I want to shout out, partially because I worked on it, but also because I truly believe in it being a good resource for newer players to get a handle on the rules of the game. There's a website called talishar.com, and there's a single player mode called our roguelike, Blackjack's Tavern. And it's not a true game of Flesh and Blood because it plays more like a roguelike. It's something that we invented using the rules of Flesh and Blood and using the cards. And it's based on the engine that runs multiplayer one-on-one games. So because it uses the rule set of Talishar, you can get a feel for what it feels like to play Flesh and Blood by running through the cards. You understand how to play cards, how to block, how to pitch cards, And it's a good starting resource for somebody who just wants to get used to the rules of the game. Just recognize that it's not quite how a regular game runs, but it's pretty fun. I'm pretty proud of it, and I would love as many people to play it as they can.
Heck, if you're someone who's been playing Flesh and Blood for a while and you're tired of running up against the exact same decks and you wanna see it get spruced up a little bit, play the roguelike.
It's actually really fun.
Fun for everyone, newer and older players alike.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move on now to the yellow pitch, where I'm going to discuss the average level of play. So I was thinking of this very much like, what's the average Flesh and Blood player do? The average Flesh and Blood player, they have a couple of decks. Maybe they invested in one or two pieces of equipment. They probably have a Blitz deck, probably a classic constructed deck. They go to their local armories. They're not flying multiple states over or to another country to play in these big competitive events. This is what I sort of see the average Flesh and Blood player as. Like I had said, they have those decks for the two main formats, Blitz and Classic Constructed. You could always look at other formats. There are other great formats to play, like Commoner and Clash. These are very good, especially as budget options if you're a new player coming in and there is a little bit of a scene for Commoner or Clash at your local gaming store. I highly recommend it. It's a lot easier to put together a budget list for Commoner and Clash than there is for Blitz or Classic Constructed. There's also really fun multiplayer formats like Ultimate Pit Fight, where some of these heroes that we encouraged people to step away from, like the Merchant or like that Guardian Yoji, they shine a little bit better in Ultimate Pit Fight than in one-on-one formats like Blitz and Classic Constructed. And I personally think the best way of getting into the game and one of the best ways of building a collection is limited formats, sealed and draft. Draft, my whole sort of secret strategy to starting a Magic the Gathering deck back in the day was that I'd do a draft and then I'd just turn that draft deck into a standard deck.
Yeah, that could definitely kind of work with Flesh and Blood. You do a draft, you 3-0. You're like, how can I turn this victory into a Blitz deck? And then you got your 40-card Blitz deck, and you're playing Blitz, and you tune it. You get the singles you need to make it a little bit more real, a little bit more competitive, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to bring this up into a Classic Constructed deck.
Let's go.
I just need 20 more cards, and then I have a CC deck, and there's a nice little ladder there.
Yeah, it helps you get up there. But probably where you will end up starting most of the time and where you may end up doing most of your play is at the kitchen table. Kitchen table Flesh and Blood is really fun. Like I had mentioned, like we had sort of mentioned earlier, this is where you really get to determine what power level you guys want to be playing at. So if you don't have the money, if you're a college student or you're just tight in the wallet, then kitchen table is really where you want to be playing. You are able to put together budget options, not spend a bunch of money on equipment, and still have fun playing the game without any of this concern of strength and power level and, oh, I don't have the best cards. So kitchen table is great for that. It's also a really great way to sort of just exchange decks at low stakes. It's a great way of being like, oh, here, have my deck. You try this out. What do you think?
Just to be clear, when you say kitchen table, you're really just talking about anything that's not part of an organized event, right?
Yes. So no organized event. This is you and a friend or someone else you know sitting down at pretty much any table anywhere. Kitchen table was sort of used to describe, oh man, where did kitchen table come from?
Well, it's like you're playing at home. It's probably on the kitchen table. You know?
Yeah. But this could also just be at your LGS. Yeah, if you go to your local game store and you just say, hey, I want to play Flesh and Blood. Anyone have a Flesh and Blood deck? That would be kitchen table Flesh and Blood. Kitchen table is great for brewing up different decks. It's great for budget, and it's great for trying out those lesser played formats. It's just lower stakes and far more focused around having fun. Another place you'll probably end up playing a lot is online simulators, both Tabletop Simulator and Talishar. So we mentioned Talishar as being this online simulator where people can help learn the game one-on-one with that roguelike. But most of the time what it is that it's a sort of open meeting room where you can put in a deck list and then match with anybody online to play against them.
Yeah. Talishar has a caveat to it. First of all, it's fan run. It's not an official resource. Therefore, they do their best to keep the engine as close to the official rules as possible, but there are some discrepancies that come up. If something works one way in Talishar, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you go to a tournament and you try to play a card like the way it works on Talishar, that it actually works that way. Sometimes there's some discrepancies, and it's run by some really awesome, loyal, hardworking volunteers who do their best and are really receptive. If you let them know something's not working correctly, it's usually fixed within a couple days. But they'll be the first to tell you, Talishar is not an official resource. It's not a referee. Don't quote us. Don't cite us as it works that way on Talishar, so I should be able to do it here.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is not the best place to learn how to play the game, but I think it is a great place to play the game.
I think it's a great way to learn how to play, but the nuance of how exact things work is sometimes wrong in Talishar, and they'll be the first to tell you that.
Yeah, good. A very, very important caveat. For me, I found it great whenever I was testing out deck lists or small changes, or if I was going, okay, do I really want to spend $100 on this equipment? Is it going to make that much of a difference for me? It was pretty easy to ask my friends to jump on Talishar and play a couple games with or without the card, see how it feels. It's also a great place to meet people. I have made 1 or 2 friends on Discord through Talishar.
Yeah. It's Flesh and Blood communities. We're really lucky that you can chat with people after the game and talk about how it went. If you want another resource that is for single player games, felttable.com is really good for that. They have an amazing AI engine where you don't have to play with another person. So you can choose the deck for you and the AI, and you can play solo games. That's another really great resource for getting into the game and learning, as well as
brewing up, trying out different deck lists.
Yeah, and sometimes single player is nice because I don't want to wait for my opponent to take their turn, or I want to be able to play as long as I want. I want to be able to get out from the game and come back. Felt Table is great for that.
Mm-hmm. But this still is sort of dancing around what I think is the main meat and potatoes of playing Flesh and Blood.
Oh, yeah.
Armory events.
Let's go.
So armory events are typically weekly gatherings at your local gaming store where they host a fairly straightforward tournament. They throw everybody into a big list online, and then people get paired off. Winners get paired together, losers get paired together, and that goes on and on and on until you've played 3 or 4 rounds, typically. Depends on how long the armory event is at your local gaming store. Mm-hmm. And the winner gets a nice little cold foil card. Sometimes they raffle off a playmat, and everyone who shows up is typically able to get a promo. Of course, every single local gaming store is going to run their armory slightly differently. Mm-hmm. But this is the official LSS-supported event. Legend Story Studios puts together these things called armory kits to give to these local game stores so they can give you things for showing up and playing.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have people who are really just there to hang out and play. You get some cool promos for going. Other people specifically go for the cold foil or promos that are given out these armory kits. So I think it works. These armory kits work as a way to get people to come into the store and get excited about playing.
Yeah, I know that the first few times I showed up, I really just felt like I was getting free swag. Our local gaming store where we all ended up meeting actually was especially great. I loved the feeling of community that I got going to these armory games or to these armory events. And that's really the emphasis of the armories. It's that it's supposed to connect you to a local community of Flesh and Blood players.
Yeah, and I will say until the cows come home that Flesh and Blood is a great game, and I love the mechanics, but the community is what keeps people there. It'd be really hard to find a group of similar, extremely kind and extremely smart people all at once who are just very polite and always ready to help a new player get started or get better in some aspect of their gameplay.
Yeah. I was able to show up to my first Classic Constructed event, and I went, hey, I don't really have the money to like make a great deck, so I printed up some proxies. Is that okay? And everybody was cool with it. Everyone was completely okay with me playing with proxies. People offered to lend me their physical copy of cards. You know, they really just want you to be able to sit down and play the game. And I think that's what makes those armories so special. Do you guys want to talk at all about some specific moments or memories from your time going to armories?
Yeah, when I first started playing, I actually discovered it while I was visiting my friend in the South, and we heard rumblings of Flesh and Blood, and I was watching some nonsense take place. I didn't really know what was going on, but we bought a couple packs just to see what was up. And when I got home, I went to my local game store, which was majority Magic the Gathering players, and I found out that the exact person I was talking to was actually trying to start up their Flesh and Blood community there. So I was like, oh, sweet, say less. And so from there, I ended up buying some boxes for myself just to like get started, see what the cards look like, and do my own research. I ended up pulling some sweet legendaries, and I took the worst Katsu deck I've ever seen in my life to my armory in Kingslayer Games in Fountain Valley. And from there, I was like hooked. The people I played against were so kind. Some of the smartest people I've ever met. I didn't know that at the time, but as I've gotten to know them, they're just incredibly smart. And like for me, I'm very much a perfectionist, and I like to like get as deep into a game as I can without going too crazy with it. So for me, it was just like this is exactly what I was looking for out of a card game.
One thing I really like about our local game store, this is Finch and Sparrow Games, especially in Southern California where we live, you can have some really competitive players, like people that are really able to walk the walk. At the same time, though, I go to these armory nights and it feels more like we're all just joking around, having a great time, like laughing at the game and not taking it too seriously. And I kind of like how, at least at our armory, I feel like I can just decide how much fun / how serious I'm going to treat the game that night. Mm-hmm. And that's a really nice feeling to have as much fun as I want, but also to play as competitively as I want. And that's something I really appreciate about like our group.
Yeah.
For sure.
Armories are great for that. You know, I think it is important to note that if you're just getting into the game and you get that little starter deck or that deck that your friend made you and you bring it to an armory, you may run up into somebody whose deck is going to be more optimized. Mm-hmm. Armories do give EXP, I believe. Back me up on this, Joel.
Yep, they sure do.
Yeah, they give EXP that sort of goes into being able to be invited to some bigger tournaments. And so some people will take it a bit more seriously.
Mm. That's probably really depends on your area. SoCal is one of the like 10 places in the world where you can go to a different armory every night and use all those points that you get just by attending the armory and winning some rounds. And you can use those points to get invited to big tournaments. You can't do that everywhere. You have to have like that critical mass of game stores. So something you'll see in SoCal is those grinders.
The sweaties.
Yeah.
But even then, like those guys who are the grinders at our game store are really fun guys, and I love playing against them.
Yeah, they're also typically nice.
Yeah.
Very commonly at our game store, they offered nice, more expensive equipment. They would, I think in one instance, I was playing Viserai and I was proxying the Spellbound Creepers, the foot equipment, or leg equipment, I should say. And the person I was sitting across from goes, "Oh, I have a copy of that." And they just reach into their bag and pull out an extra copy and go, "There, now you're not playing with a proxy."
Yep, not a rare occurrence at all. People are just so quick to be like, "Hey, try this out, dude," you know? Or even if it's like you I've done this a couple times too, where I see some poor soul, I'm using arcane damage and they have a bunch of armor that blocks physical damage and not the damage that I'm used to. I'm like, dude, hold on, give me a second, and I'll give them a few pairs of null rune equipment so that they have some chance. And it's a really good learning opportunity. And that's what I love about Flesh and Blood 2, is teaching a new player like a different mechanic, the light in their eyes, like, oh my god, that's so cool, you know? Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely a part I like about Flesh and Blood 2.
Yeah. You may find your deck getting a little outclassed, but thankfully there are some really great resources to helping level up your play. So there's sites like FabDB, Fabrary, the official FabTCG website, or Fabrec. All of these are different websites that help you look up deck lists and be able to follow the more competitive hardcore scene, see sort of what the meta is for your hero, what decks people are talking about for your hero. Talishar is great for testing those out before you end up making that purchase on those cards. And it's a great way to sort of get reps in. Just play games, play, and really start to understand your hero and sort of what decisions you need to make and when in what matchups. Especially because you can match with anybody anywhere, right? It really helps you just get games in rather than only relying on your weekly armories. And finally, there's podcasts and YouTube where there are people who are experts, people who only play one hero all the time. That's all they do. They play Dash and only Dash. They play nobody else. They know all the matchups for Dash, and they're going to create a whole YouTube channel about Dash.
And we appreciate those people because it's like, oh, I've never played this hero before. Let me stop by here, see what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's so useful. So if you're looking to maybe swap heroes, get invested in a new hero, there's tons of resources out there for you to level up your play. Joel, what would we want to level up our play for?
I'm so glad you asked, Clark. This definitely wasn't scripted, all natural. So this is a section that's like sort of near and dear to my heart because over the last, I would say 2 or 3 months, I've really wanted to amp up my own gameplay. I really like the high level competitive play in Flesh and Blood and the people that you get access to, like when you try to take the game more seriously. So I wanted to go over sort of what steps you need to take for competitive play, I guess, or get closer to that arena. And I would say first is like figure out how many events you can even go to a week. As mentioned previously, you may live in a desolate wasteland, not inhabitable at all, and have like one LGS in your area. And, that kind of sucks because you really want to go to multiple armories a week. This game is all about your reps. So if you're playing once a week, you might still learn a lot depending on who you're playing with, but the more reps you get in with a hero, the better.
Yeah, I really think that's especially true because of how matchup dependent Classic Constructed can feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I kind of feel as a general rule of thumb, you have your hero, and the first time you play against another hero, you will lose that game. Like if I play Briar, and the first time I played against Dorinthia, I lost. The first time I played against Icelander, I lost. Because you have to learn that matchup. You have to see what they're doing. And even in that specific matchup, it could be a hero that you know how to play in a different deck, but now that you're piloting a new deck, they are pivoting their game plan against you. You need to figure out exactly how to make that matchup work. And just by playing the game a lot, you're going to experience that. And you need to have those opponents in order to learn those skills.
That's a great distinction because there are a lot of decks that, based on who they're playing, they will play completely different cards into that strategy. So you may also alter your strategy because of how they're going to play against you. So there's a lot of nuance to it, and you will likely do poorly if you are constantly switching heroes. I would say another important part of getting into competitive play for Flesh and Blood is playing meta adjacent decks. And so there's always going to be 1 or 2 decks that are just going to blow you out if you're playing, some of the weaker heroes. So I would say you can either play those really good heroes or you can play something that's good into those heroes specifically. You can take it one step further. You can play what's good into the counters. It's like a spider web of possibilities of what you can play. But it also means that some heroes it's not your time. You need to, sit in the corner for a bit, ride it out. Sorry, Bolton.
I mostly agree, Joel. I think if you want to get results at a good competitive high-level tournament, there is a partial requirement to play a hero that has gotten that results independent of you. However, Flesh and Blood is kind of unique in that you can actually have a hero that you are really good at and you champion that hero. And we see people do that often and are able to put up results with that hero, even though it's one of the worst heroes in the game. Like, that can happen. It's hard, and those people have done lots and lots of reps in order to make it work. And those people are probably also playing other decks as a way for them to practice and get a better understanding of the game. If you really like one hero, you probably, if you want to do really well have to play other heroes as well just to get a feel for what the game is like from the other side, right? Have a better understanding of the game overall. But we have people who are able to do really well with a single hero, even if that hero is considered trash.
For sure. And, you pretty much described perfectly what we call a one trick, which is just somebody who plays one deck. That's all they play. And they have a really strong fundamental understanding of that deck in particular. But what being a one trick allows you to do also is the more streamlined you can be playing your own deck and not have to pay attention as much, or you can put more aspects of the deck on autopilot, you start to pay attention more to what your opponent's doing and what your opponent deck is trying to do. So with these thousands of reps that you've just described, playing other decks, playing your own deck 1,000 times against other decks, you just have a really good foundation of the game overall and how you can modify your specific hero to do well in the meta, even if statistically your hero just does not convert well into top tournaments. Especially if you have very specific metas, like you might just steamroll because a lot of people play Guardian and you play something that's really good in a Guardian. So there's also that aspect.
I don't think you should be afraid to play very competitive heroes or very less meta heroes.
Yeah,
I think you should feel free to play the heroes you want, but do know that if you're going to pick up a new hero, you're going to have a much easier time playing a hero that is considered to be good at the time.
For sure. You don't want to start on a bad hero because you've heard rumblings of a person who did well with that deck, not taking into account how many reps they did to get that deck to where it is. Because if you net deck a really strong deck and you have no idea how it works, you're going to fail.
And this is all under the umbrella of you want to get results. That's not what every player shoots for,
right?
But if you want those results, try to find a hero that is getting those results.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think another good distinction is in order to win events, you have to play to learn and to grow. Like that can't be your main objective. You want to understand the intricacies of the same situation played out 1,000 different times to see what is the actual best optimal choice based on what they have in their hand, what they've already used as resources, what you've already used as resources. There's all these decision points. So really understanding that you're going to take a lot of L's while you're learning is important and not let that affect your mental in the long run. Another aspect I think gets brushed off a little bit is making smart investments. And I mean that by purchasing equipment, cards, or staples or whatever you call it early, so that if that archetype of hero gets good in the long run, then you don't have to spend as much to get into it. What you'll see in trading card games often is if something blows up in popularity or just happens to be the best deck in the format, a lot of their staples will be really expensive at that time. So as a player like myself, who maybe doesn't want to spend like $100 on a deck every time something gets better, I like making investments early because it's a hero that I like and I may want to play it in the future, but I'm just not interested in it right now. So I think that is also one way to hedge against having to make these bigger investments if you're maybe dipping your toes into competitive and not an enfranchised player like some other people might be. One thing also for me that was difficult to figure out, like, where were these competitive events? And you might see these events but not really understand what they are. Each large event will be preceded by a season of either pro quests, road to nationals, or skirmishes.
There is a great infographic on the Fab TCG website that goes over all the tiers of play.
I love that pyramid. Sometimes when I have free time, I'll just go to look at that graphic. That's how much I like it.
Yeah, so these smaller tier 2 events will be preceded by these larger events and will be really great ways to not only earn yourself some XP over the long run, but also get really good competition, because that's where people who are really serious about the game will spend most of their time instead of your regular armories. And so these might be over the weekend or replacing an armory altogether because they're much larger events and consider rated events. So it's a different level of play altogether. And you'll often see them in the previous 3 months of a big event. Like, for instance, right now we're in our Road to National season. So this weekend there's going to be an RTN, or a couple rather. And if you do really well at this tournament, you get an invite, but also these events will reward armory XP, and there's much more matches over the course of the day. So these spread out across 3 weekends or a month or whatever the case may be is a really good way for you to expose yourself to what kind of level of play you'll be seeing at the actual event later down the line. If you're in a place that doesn't have a ton of local game stores, you might find yourself traveling a lot. So you might have to go across state lines or drive 2 hours to a place you've never been just to play some Flesh and Blood. So keep that in mind as well. If you want to play competitively, just get a really good scope of what is in your area and what's feasible in terms of travel, because it can get pretty crazy if you're not prepared. Now, if you're not a sweaty casual like myself and some of my friends, you may ask why get into competitive play. For me, I've really enjoyed just understanding the game on a deeper level. I'm kind of a nerd about the intricacies of the combat chain, for instance, and unique interactions like that. The more I learn, the more interested I am, because oh, that does make sense, because it's very different from what I had perception of either watching YouTube or just playing in my local armories.
When I was playing in the local 1K events that we had, I was trying to be really serious about my triggers and things, and doing things in the right order. And I had a couple players be like, "Oh, you got to do things this way because." I announced I was going to go to the calling, and they were like, they could shark you if you do it this way.
Oh,
They could be like, you could miss your trigger because you did it in the wrong order. I'm like, oh, thank you for telling me that, because I like knowing that I need to do things in the right order. I get to the calling, no one sharks me. That's not the way that the tournament was going. But it was really fun to get that understanding of this is how on a minute by minute level.
The game is going. That's so funny. I've heard similar things where it's oh, well, this is technically the start of your turn and not your action phase. You need to do this before that. And usually people have a pretty good understanding of
no one really cares.
Yeah, no one really cares, but it's you will find, not to say you won't find that one person who's
sure,
judge, immediately. So be careful with that.
Definitely an exception.
For sure. Yeah. And if you like being rewarded for skilled play, I think Flesh and Blood embodies that extremely well, because the way that the game works, you often see the same cards twice or 3 times a game if it goes long enough. But also, if you pitch certain cards at the wrong times, you could get stuck with them in the second cycle and be in a really tough spot to get out of. So it's those things. If you want to pay attention to those things, competitive play is a great place to really hone those skills and see how those micro decisions set you apart from the other players in your local armory. And I've said this a bunch of times already, but I think the amazing people that you meet and the people who are truly gifted at trading cards in general, but also Flesh and Blood too, is also part of the fun. Being able to go to a big event with your friends and meet oh my God, that's, well, I'm not going to name drop anybody, but there are a lot of names that I look out for that I'm just geeking out over because of how they play a specific hero. So that's always something that I enjoy.
Yeah, the funny thing is Flesh and Blood is still a relatively small community. Mm-hmm. And so if you pay attention to the scene, you're going to see these people at big events. I went to the Pro Tour in Baltimore. So fun. I'm not somebody, I didn't play in the Pro Tour. I'm not cool enough to be invited to that. I barely did well in the calling. I would even say I did well. I did okay at the calling. But I got to see all these people walking around the convention center. I'm like, that's James White. He made the game.
Wait, you saw James White?
I saw Rudy from Alpha Investments.
Oh, no.
Now, I don't have the courage to talk to any of these people, but
Yeah.
I saw Michael Hamilton. I saw everybody.
Wow, that's so cool. So
it was really fun.
If you don't know, Michael Hamilton is the current world champion. And actually, the runner-up Worlds player, Chris Iali, I run into him and Tyler Horspool in the round 1 of our local 1Ks every single time. It's one or the other. I get crushed by one of them. So it's really cool.
It's the fun thing about SoCal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the last thing, I think this might not apply to everyone, but you do get a lot of really sick promos if you play in these higher level events. There's gold foils. You might hear rainbow and cold foils, but gold foils are reserved for the top level of play. Incredibly cool and worth a lot of money. They can pay for your trip and even, be your salary if you really take it that seriously.
That's my dream, is to be good enough at the game to win myself a gold foil.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, what a dream.
I will say competitive Flesh and Blood has been super rewarding for me, I get so filled with adrenaline when it's time to play. I'm like shuffling up my deck and trying to sideboard, and like I'm so shaky, especially because I play Briar, where it's the hero with so many triggers, and I have such a bad habit of missing them at the important time. So I have to be like really focused and really disciplined and trying to make all these like decisions, and it gets really nerve-wracking, and it's so fun for that reason. Like sends my blood pressure through the roof, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I'm pretty calm and collected in like the first few rounds of Swiss, and then 5 and 6, I'm starting to, get a little shaky. And then if I'm in the top 8, I'm a wreck. So I think, getting more exposed to that is definitely what I need so that I'm still in that focused mindset.
My other favorite thing about competitive play is the ELO points. I freaking love fake internet points. You give me those ranking points, I am all about it. It takes like a week after like an event, at least, for your ELO to be updated, and I'm checking like every day on the website because I'm like, how many ELO points did I get?
Oh my god.
Where does my ranking go?
Such a goblin.
Oh my god. I finally got enough ELO points to go over John Smith. Let's go.
They recently changed it so you need 1550 to be on the leaderboards. And
Are
so
you on the leaderboards?
I'm at 1537 at the time of recording this podcast. I was at 1520. I just got a bump to like 1537.
Next one.
Yeah.
You're going to see Fuzzy Delp on that leaderboard.
We're about to go into Road to Nationals, so there's a world where I like do well in Constructed, but I don't even know if I'm going to be able to do an RTN this year because like my schedule's really busy for this month.
Bummer.
I'm dreaming. There's only so many chances to get those ELO points because they have to be the rated events, which is only the few times during a year unless you're traveling.
I took a screenshot of all the events that were coming out, and I sent it to everybody who makes plans. I'm like, hey, I'm not free these days. Do not talk to me. I'm on my grind.
All right. Let's go ahead and move into the Arsenal Zone, the end of our podcast where we talk about a card. It can be a good card, a bad card. It doesn't matter. I specifically like going to Fuzzy's collection and randomly pulling out a card and talking about that card. It's taken me a while to find this, but it makes my life so much easier than having to pick one.
God, imagine thinking.
I know, right? So much easier to just let my fingers just skipping over the cardboard decide for me.
And what did you find, Clark?
I picked out Rally the Rear Guard.
Gross.
I remember this was actually one of the first like Flesh and Blood cards I ever actually ended up playing with. I don't remember why. I must have seen it in like a limited format or something.
I think it's also in Levia's starter deck, if I'm not mistaken, because it's like a way to fill your graveyard.
Crazy.
It's a 6 power. It's a great way of filling your graveyard. It pops Phantasm. It's technically an on-rate attack. It's 2 for 6. That is technically on rate. Mm-hmm. It has a really interesting ability of being able to be tutored by an item. There's an item that lets you, I think when like a condition is met, you can destroy it to go add Rally the Rearguard defending to a combat chain. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting for that. In terms of defense, it's slightly underrated. It blocks for 2.
What does the card do?
It blocks for 2, and you can discard a card to let it block for 3 more.
Oh, for 3 more.
For 3 more.
Oh, so blocks 5. Oh,
yeah, blocks
interesting.
5.
2 card 5.
Still technically a little underrate, right? You want to... the typical good block rate you want is a card has 3 block. Mm-hmm. So this is underrate.
It does get around like things that stop you from playing D-Reacts.
Yeah, dominate or things that stop you from playing D-Reacts. So like it has some very niche use cases. Mm-hmm. And that's why just about nobody runs it. This card is just kind of generally bad.
A real bait and switch there, Clark.
I mean, it's okay. It's not like bad, but like nobody really plays this card. I can't call it good, right?
Yeah, I think you'd be wrong if you said that.
Yeah, it's not good. In just about every circumstance, there is a better card to play instead of this. Mm-hmm. So Rally the Rearguard, congratulations. You're so mid that nobody ever really thinks about you. Great job, I guess.
Nice.
What card did you want to shout out, Joel?
So I wanted to shout out a card called Tome of Torment. And this card literally just draws you a card, replaces itself. It's cost 0. I think it's a 2-block. But it doesn't have go again. So you probably just draw a card and then pass your turn because that uses your 1 action point, doesn't give you a new one. But what I really like about this card is, even though it's pretty bad, if you set it up just right, you can have some pretty explosive turns by playing it from Banish. That is its other piece of text. You can play this card from the Banish zone. So I personally am really excited to see what Dusk Till Dawn, the next supplemental set, spoils. That makes this card kind of crazy for Levia or for the newly spoiled Vincent. Because playing from Banish to draw a card, it's like, okay, now I have a 5-card hand for free or a 6-card hand for free. And if I have any extra action points, either through Scapskin Leathers or whatever else Vincent can do, this is like a really good power card. So I'm really excited to see what they do with this. And it's a shadow card, so I'm going to be able to use it for either Levia or Vincent, which I'm excited for both of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. I love every card that has the word tome on it.
Yeah. Yeah, tomes are pretty cool.
Tomes are great. Draw cards. Love drawing cards. Drawing cards is always good.
Can't do it enough.
Yeah.
All right, for my card shout out, I have a question for you guys. When you think ninja, what is ninja all about? First thing that pops into your head.
Kodachis.
Yeah, Kodachis.
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 Okay.
Kodachi locks.
Even more general than that. Combo, okay.
Kodachi luck? Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, Kodachi locks.
What differentiates it from other classes?
Daggers?
That's true. Dagger.
No, assassins.
You're not saying what I want you to say, so I'm just going to tell you.
No. Hold on. Let me guess. Attack actions? No.
Yeah, attacks, right?
Yeah, actually?
Like, ninja is go wide, right? They do
sure.
lots of attacks. If I'm planning on going wide,
Yeah.
I want to run lots of attacks, right?
That's true.
I want to play attack action cards. So, pop quiz. When is the first set that prints a ninja non-attack action card?
Dine Uprising.
Was it Uprising?
No. Shoot. It's
The first set
Everfest.
to have a ninja non-attack action card.
Everfest? No, it is Uprising.
So in Uprising, they have a draconic ninja attack action.
Yeah.
A draconic ninja non-attack. So you get a point, Joel.
Let's go.
What's the first set that has a ninja non-attack with no talent?
Oh.
Is it Uprising?
No, that's Dynasty, I'm pretty sure. Can I say the name of the card, or do you want to reveal it?
You can say the name of the card.
Is it Predatory Strike?
So there are
Or a Sneak, excuse me.
Predatory Streak, I think is what you're thinking of.
That's probably it, yeah.
Dynasty is the first set to have ninja non-attack cards, and there are multiple in Dynasty. There's like 5.
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
include like the non-attack auras, right?
Oh,
Are these just
right.
are these the things that synergize with the Crouching Tigers?
Yeah, in Dynasty they did a bunch of Crouching Tiger stuff for ninja. I wonder if the designers were like, bro, how can we make non-attack action cards for ninja? Because they're hard, Tenny. And this was what they came up with. They came with non-attacks that make attacks.
Yeah, that
Tracks.
That's really cool, actually.
That tracks.
Because Predatory Streak gives you 3 Crouching Tigers,
Yes,
right?
as a matter of fact, that is the specific card that I want to shout out. It's Predatory Streak.
Wow.
It's
So wait, Joel just got it, and you just didn't tell him that he got it?
I'm telling him now.
You kind of left me in the dark there.
Yeah, he kind of gaslit you.
Well, there's multiple, but this is the one I wanted to focus on.
Nice.
I think it's the most hallmarky one. It's a common, comes in red, yellow, blue. The red one costs 0 and makes 3 Crouching Tigers in your Banish zone, and you can play them this turn.
Woo.
So it's literally they were like, what do we do for non-attacks? It makes 3 attacks. It's more attack action cards than an attack action card. It also blocks for 2 and has go again. So for this special episode, I brought 2 copies of Predatory Streak that I'd like to sign and hand to you guys to celebrate.
Wow.
So let me just unsleeve them. And let me just get my Sharpie and sign it. Here we
Bet you didn't
go.
know this was an ASMR podcast.
Because it's not.
That's true.
Fuzzy. Fuzzy.
Fuzzy
That's
Wuzzy.
my name. One for you and one for you.
Wow. Thanks, Fuzz. I don't play
Thank you,
Katsu,
Fuzz.
but this is going straight in my binder.
It's the version from Dynasty as opposed to the promo. I probably could have gotten you guys promos, but
Would you have
did it.
signed and given us promos?
Absolutely.
Wow.
I don't think I would want you to do that. I'm fine with a comment.
Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Executive producer, Talon Stradley. Logistics coordinator, John Farkas. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. And last but not least, you. Thank you for listening. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me podcast. Stay tuned for some outtakes. There's a lot more room to come back from behind. It is a longer game.
Can you re-say that? Come back from behind.
Like, rephrase it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to hand it off to you?
Yeah.
How do I do that?